so glad you could join us tonight for what promises to be an insightful and empowering event. This evening is brought to you by Good Natural, a proudly Canadian company that has been dedicated to supporting your journey to better health for over 25 years. Whether it's through carefully curated natural health products, expert advice, or educational events like this one, Good Natural is committed to helping individuals and families live healthier, more vibrant lives. Tonight, we're excited to bring you a presentation focused on a topic that touches all of us, cognitive health and its surprising connection to inflammation. As we navigate busy lives, mental clarity and emotional well-being have never been more important, and understanding the deeper links between inflammation, nutrient deficiencies, and even muscle health can make a real difference in how we feel and function every day. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kate Rheaume, a best-selling author and expert in natural medicine. Dr. Kate is a licensed doctor of naturopathic medicine and has appeared on networks like Global and CTV, sharing her insights on a wide range of health topics. With years of clinical experience and a background in education, Dr. Kate is passionate about helping others achieve better health through natural approaches. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kate Rheaume.
Thanks, everyone. Welcome. I'm so delighted to see so many of you here taking steps to improve your own health, being proactive in your own health. That warms my heart. And I'm delighted to see people of all ages because brain health is a topic that pertains to people of all ages, and it's never too early to start doing things to make your brain work better both now and for the future. But I'm curious about what drew you out tonight. What did you come here hoping to learn about? Who's here because you want to learn about dementia prevention, for example? A couple of hands, maybe, sort of, yeah. So preserving your brain function for the future, is that the kind of thing? Or making your brain work better today? Anybody? Yeah? How about the inflammation component of the topic? Everybody put their hands up for that. Okay, so this is why I'm asking, because sometimes I want to make sure that I'm sharing information that's consistent with what you're hoping to learn. Definitely inflammation is a big part of cognitive and brain function. And although it's not necessarily the type of inflammation we normally think about, and so we're not necessarily, the focus tonight isn't necessarily about, say, relief from aches and pains, but inflammation as it pertains to brain function. Does that make sense? Okay, I feel like, is the mic cutting out a bit? It is, okay. We might need either new mic or new batteries, ladies or not. Okay, any other concerns or things you'd like to learn about?
Mitochondrial health.
Mitochondrial health. Ooh, that's a topic that I love and that is fascinating to me, and I'm happy to talk about that. Okay, anything else? Yes?
How to get rid of brain fog?
Ooh, yeah, that's another good one. Okay, we can touch on that for sure. Anything else? I don't want to overpromise here, but we're going to have a long list. Diet. Diet, sure, as it pertains to all of these things. Okay, so, should we try that again? Thank you. Okay, so bear with me, I've got a bit of a dry throat, but I think between some lozenges and some water, I should be fine. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to touch on all of those various topics to give you an idea of what brings me here. So I, as was mentioned, I'm the author of this book, Vitamin K2 and the Calcium Paradox, How Little Known Vitamin Can Save Your Life. But this topic of brain function is one that is personally very important to me because my dad had Alzheimer's. Now he died in 2017 at the age of 91, had a very long life. But the last decade of his life, he did have Alzheimer's. And so that is something that drives me literally on a day-to-day basis to understand how I can protect my brain based on that, but I'd also like to have a long health span. So what we're going to talk, what I had originally planned to talk about was factors that contribute to a healthy brain and those associated with declines in brain health, food and lifestyle that nourish your brain, and what we can do in terms of both diet and lifestyle to help with brain cognition and healthy mood, as well as nutrients that support brain health. Being a naturopathic doctor, a lot of what I do is focused on nutrition. But I can also incorporate information about mitochondria, because this is extremely important. And we will be touching on inflammation, more so as it pertains to brain health, but I think we're a nice size group that we can make this interactive. So feel free, as we get into it, to ask questions as we go along. I'll try to share information that pertains to what you came out to learn for. So the first thing to know is, well, who thinks that your brain mostly just declines with age? That's more or less how things go. Nobody put their hand up for that. Okay, that's good. Some thinking about it, but no, didn't want to put their hands up. Yeah, okay. Well, the fact is, our brain is changing every day. In medical terms, technical terms, this is called plastic. Now, that has now a new meaning with microplastics and whatnot. But the point is, our brain is always changing, and things we do can influence how our brain changes. So here's a few interesting facts about the brain that you can use to amaze your friends and family at your next gathering. First of all, 60% of your brain's dry weight. That means, like the rest of the body, the brain is about 70% water. We as people are roughly 70% water. But if you take the water out, what you've got left is roughly 60% fat. That's really important. Your brain is mostly fat. That's kind of cool. What else? Your brain uses 20% of the oxygen that you breathe in. So every breath you breathe in, your brain uses 20% of the oxygen. Your brain does not represent 20% of your body's weight. So it's using way more oxygen than you'd expect. It's also a very energy-hungry organ, and it uses way more energy than you'd expect. So actually, the first question that was here about mitochondria is important. Who has heard of mitochondria? Oh, you guys are an educated group. I should have known better. Okay, so mitochondria then, as you know, are our batteries, engines, powerhouses that power all our cells. Almost every cell in the body has energy needs, and your average cell will have a couple thousand mitochondria in it. Each brain cell can have up to 100,000 mitochondria in a single cell. So that starts to hint at the fact that the brain is producing, it needs a ton of energy, which is why it's taking in so much oxygen that's required for this energy production process. So we can talk a little bit more about that later, but your brain is using up a lot of oxygen. The brain is not fully developed until 25 years of age. Let that sink in. This is why teenagers do a lot of things that we think of as kind of dumb, and even later on you look back and think, I'd never do that now. Because the brain keeps developing until the age of 25, particularly the frontal lobe, which is involved in making logical, rational decisions. It doesn't develop until later. The brain does start to become smaller at a rate of about 5% per decade after the age of 40. That is a thing that can happen, but there are ways that you can slow that process down and minimize it. And you can grow new brain cells at any age. And it's a lot simpler to do than you think. And I will tell you before the end of this evening how you can grow a few new brain cells, at least very quickly. Okay. So when we look at brain function and information processing and taking a bit longer to process information. And that leads to more trouble with multitasking, being able to switch. There's no such thing as true multitasking. Multitasking, you can't actually do two things at once. Multitasking is quickly switching your attention or your thinking from one thing to another. That can change a little bit. And sometimes slight changes in reasoning and memory, but you should still be able to function. You shouldn't really be interfering with your day-to-day life. Now, changes in brain function because of environment or disease. So in other words, what we might consider to be pathological changes include things like dementia that I will talk about, as well as, of course, stroke or injury. There are things we can do to prevent that, but specifically everything I'll be talking about tonight will help with maintaining brain function in all the categories that we're talking about, as well as improving outcomes if there were to be something like an injury. So, what kinds of things causes the brain to change with age? All right, here's a list. I didn't realize the font was so small on this, but okay, first of all, inflammation in the brain. We will talk about that shortly. Now, when I say inflammation in the brain, I'm not talking about encephalitis, which is a condition which will land you in the hospital with, life-threatening condition. We're talking about a lower grade type of inflammation I'll get to shortly. Mitochondrial dysfunction, as was brought up. So, because the brain is such an energy-hungry organ, you have 100,000 mitochondria potentially in a single cell, billions of them in your brain. So, an average adult, healthy person, would have roughly 10 quadrillion mitochondria in your whole body. It's like a stars in the sky kind of number. You could have several billion of them in your brain, but if over time, due to the aging process, due to lifestyle, things I'll talk about, your mitochondria are declining in quantity or quality, then they're producing less energy, and your brain is not getting as much energy. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can make that work better. Digestive disorders. We won't focus so much on it, but there is a connection between the brain and the gut that's important. Nutrient deficiencies. The brain needs a lot of nutrients to keep functioning. The mitochondria need them, other aspects of the brain function needs it. Increase in your stress response. So just more stress, which elevates your levels of stress hormones, things like cortisol, can affect your brain functioning. Insomnia. I'll explain later why insomnia is super important to brain health. Hormone changes, menopause and andropause can affect the brain, the way the brain works, but it shouldn't have long-term deleterious effects. So these are areas or menopause is a time, there'll be often a temporary, by temporary I mean it can last a few years, brain fog that will improve. We can talk a little bit more about brain fog a little bit later. Blood sugar balances, thyroid disorders, as well as a mix of medications. If you're on a number of different prescription medications, it's worth speaking to your pharmacist about whether the interactions between them can have any effect on brain function. Okay, so what happens, to give you an idea of what the brain looks like a little bit, the one on the far left is a scan of a normal brain, and those blue areas in the middle represent space in the brain. As we progress to mild cognitive impairment, there's more empty space and less brain matter. Over here on the right side, Alzheimer's disease, there's been a shrinking of the actual brain matter. Now, Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. There are multiple different types of dementia. That is the most common form of age-related dementia. Who here is concerned about that or preventing that? Depending on some? Okay, all right. So I'll do a few just things to mention or to watch for people who are concerned about that. Warning signs of dementia, any type. Memory loss, obviously, disorientation to person, place, and time. Problems keeping track of things, changes in mood and behavior, changes in understanding visual and spatial information. You're not knowing when to stop when you see a red light or how soon to stop, for example, those kinds of things. problems with language, misplacing things frequently, and or withdrawal from social activities. So these are kinds of things to be aware of and to watch out for. Who has ever, well, to give you an idea of something not to be concerned about, who's ever walked into the kitchen and forgotten why you went in there? Okay, everybody. So I mention this because this is not a sign of impending Alzheimer's. They have done studies that show that walking, turn it off. Stop. Okay, all right, let's try. So they've done studies showing that walking through a doorway causes you to forget things. It's a legitimate psychological, I don't know why it is that happens that way, but it does. So if that happens to you, don't worry. Or you go to some room, you do something, you come back, and you go, oh, that's not why I went there. You know, I went to get the Kleenex, and I did something else and came back. So that kind of thing. So the key to that is, so this is normally how the brain works for everybody at all ages. I had my son come into the kitchen not long ago and go, I can't remember why I came in here. I was like, oh, that's great, because it means your brain's working just fine. So don't worry about that when that happens. The key thing is that, if you ever notice that when you go back to where you started, then it comes back into your head what you went, okay, so that's all normal. So I mentioned that to put your mind at ease, because usually when that happens to people, they're like, oh, here we go. It's the beginning of the end. But no. So that's just how the brain works. So that is a sign of your not dementia. That's just a normal quirky thing that the brain does. So to be aware of that. So one interesting thing that I want to talk about, everybody put their hand up for inflammation. Now, the type of inflammation that affects the brain, now any kind of inflammation in the body can affect the brain. So any kind of itis, so an itis is something that's inflamed. Usually we know, you know when you have inflammation because something, well, how do you know you have inflammation? It hurts, right. Your classic inflammation is painful. It can be red, swollen, like a twisted ankle that swells up and then doesn't move, for example. But then there can be chronic inflammation that is painful. Now, that is also associated with declines in cognitive function. But you can have inflammation that is what's called silent inflammation, which is silent inflammation. Silent inflammation is inflammation that is not painful. So this is a bit tricky, but the body is producing inflammatory compounds, but those particular inflammatory compounds may not be eliciting a pain signal, or the inflammatory compounds can be doing other things. Sometimes brain fog is one of those things that they can do, or sometimes you don't see or notice anything, but the inflammation can still be affecting the brain. Yes, I guess I could use this book, right? Being stuck behind the podium, we'll try. So the inflammation can still be affecting the brain. So studies have shown that there is this type of inflammation called neuroinflammation. And if you have it, there is a higher risk for cognitive decline and age-related cognitive impairment. And that's because the inflammatory compounds cross the blood-brain barrier, affecting the brain. And so there's a growing body of evidence that this type of inflammation is a really important underlying factor in brain changes with age. Now, the very next question is, well, is there a test for it? Not really. There are some tests for inflammation. For example, you can get your C-reactive protein checked, although if it's high, you don't necessarily know what's causing it. So the point is that if you are interested in either dealing with inflammation or protecting your brain function, we just want to sort of live and act in a way that will minimize and address the inflammation. So I'll talk about how to do that. Does that make sense? So just pretend as if you have it there, whether or not you know you do, and we won't go too far wrong. Okay, so what's causing potentially inflammation that we may or may not be feeling in our brains? Genetics, there's a certain predisposition, but it really is not a big part of the picture. Eating habits is a big factor. What we eat, what we put into our bodies 3 or plus, times a day makes a major impact on creating or healing inflammation in the body. And there are certain, no-brainer foods. We can talk a little bit more about that later. Highly processed foods, for example, certain obvious things that are promoting and creating inflammation. And I'll talk about foods that are helpful for that as well. A lack of exercise. So this is counterintuitive because you think, well, how can you be creating inflammation by just sitting there? That's exactly how it works. The body is meant to move, and if it doesn't move enough, just being sedentary actually increases inflammation in the body. So no movement will promote inflammation. Inadequate sleep. I'm going to speak more about sleep later because sleep is super important in general and for the brain. Smoking, obviously. Stress, don't underestimate it. It will create all kinds of problems, but even psychological stress will cause the body to produce inflammatory compounds. Some of those lead to brain fog. That is a trigger for some people for that foggy sensation. Any kind of peripheral inflammation. So in other words, if you know you have inflammation, and I'm guessing that the people who put their hands up is because you know you have some sort of itis or something that's hurting, that inflammation can also be affecting the brain, so be aware of that. Now, heavier aging. So it's true that when it comes to the inflammatory, so we should back up a little bit. Inflammation is a healing process, right? Their classic example of inflammation is that, that sprained ankle. You sprain your ankle, it swells up, it's painful, you can't move it, and then there's a healing process that happens as part of this inflammation. And once the healing process is finished, the inflammation goes away. When all of those symptoms are gone, then the healing's complete. And when we're younger, inflammation tends to turn on when we need it and turn off when healing is finished. As we age, sometimes the dial can get sort of turned up on the inflammatory process, so it's faster to go up and slower to come down, or there are things that can be contributing to a slower resolution of the inflammation. So that doesn't mean there's nothing we can do about it. It just means that as we age, we need to take a few extra steps to keep it in check. Viral infections can be a cause of neuroinflammation. Who feels like they may have had neuroinflammation subsequent to a viral infection? Anybody that got brain fog after getting sick? No? Nobody? Okay, that's good. Yeah, okay. All right, 1 or 2 hands up. All right, that's something that can happen. Autoimmune disease, elevated blood sugar, mitochondrial dysfunction we've already talked about, environmental factors. And so these are all the kinds of things that can potentially be creating a type of inflammation that can affect our brain. But the good news is that we can address this. And there's a lot more that we can do about it than you think. So research has shown that we can actually help to take steps to mitigate the inflammation as slow cognitive decline and help with regeneration or rejuvenation of our brain cells. Okay. So what types of steps? Does this make sense so far? Yeah? Okay, we're going to all sort of run down some very basic information that I'm going to categorize in these 3 steps. Eat well, what does that mean? Hydrate and keep moving. Supporting cognition with nootropics, and sleeping better. Okay, eat, hydrate, and move. I'm cramming this all into one category here. On the left side, a healthy brain increases what's something called brain-derived nerve factor. So this is something that helps your brain cells grow. And we're decreasing inflammation, we're improving insulin sensitivity. So I'll get into more specifics here, but more healthy fats, the monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, omega-3, omega-6s, the Mediterranean type diet. Exercise, I'll go into some specifics. And then lots of antioxidants, it's a big deal. Polyphenols, so these are things get from colorful fruits and veggies full of antioxidants. And so this is the good stuff in green. The things that will deteriorate and promote more rapid decline of brain function, inhibit our growth of the new brain cells, promote inflammation, includes lots of refined carbohydrates, the obvious things, right? White flour, white sugar, highly processed foods, sedentary lifestyle, as we mentioned, and your typical Western diet. So, just to make it clear, we're saying yes to things like fish, leafy greens, berries, anything colorful, avocados, healthy fats, nuts, spices, dark chocolate, great source of antioxidants. Coffee and tea in moderation, as long as it's not keeping you up at night, is a source of antioxidants. Any other suggestions of good, healthy things for your brain? Foods, snacks that you like that you think are brain healthy?
About herbs.
Herbs, yes, exactly. The herbs and spices are great sources of antioxidants. Sardines, for example, great snacks, so healthy, deep, cold water fish, and avoiding the obvious, artificial sweeteners of processed foods. Keeping your brain hydrated, this is more of a PSA. I have to say that your brain, as I mentioned earlier, is about 70 to 75% of water, and dehydration can exacerbate inflammation and affect your thinking. Even mild dehydration has been shown to affect cognitive performance. At 80, we have roughly 15% less water in our body than we did at age 20. And lots of drugs, things like diuretics and laxatives, can affect that. And so staying hydrated is important. Okay. Who exercises at all? Who doesn't? You're not a typical group, I would say. That's fantastic. Maybe that's why you're here. So, exercising, here's the deal with exercise when it comes to your brain health. Anything is better than nothing. Any kind of movement has been associated, even a little bit, has been associated with better brain health. And that's not to say that more is better, but we know that any kind of movement is good. So we know that exercising will slow the deterioration of the hippocampus. So that's the part of the brain that gets attacked in Alzheimer's. It's responsible for learning and short-term memory. Exercise will lower the risk of Alzheimer's disease. It's a great inflammation buster. Exercise is a way to decrease your inflammation. Exercise in midlife is associated with a 39% reduction in cognitive impairment later in life, which is interesting. So actually what you do even from your 30s and 40s and 50s onwards affects your brain later in life, but it's never too late. I'll show you some cool studies about that. 47% improvement in memory scores after 1 year of regular exercising. That particular study was just walking compared to people who are just stretching. So literally the movement. And for bonus points, building muscle. So when you say you exercise, who here is resistance or weight training? Just a few people, that's good. Okay, so any kind of movement is good. For even more brain boosting, build muscle. All kinds of studies that show that an association between muscle mass in the legs, in the grip, even in the jaw, anything where you have increased muscle mass, you have a bigger, better brain. Resistance and weight training has been shown to help improve and increase brain mass and reduce your risk of cognitive decline. So it may seem intimidating, but the brain, like the muscles, is use it or lose it kind of thing. It turns out somehow that by improving your muscle strength, you can improve your brain. You may not believe me, but it's true. Now, you may think, well, maybe I'm not going to start weight training at this point in time. There's somebody who lives not far away from where I live that you can see on social media, Facebook, Instagram, John McDonald. Here's John McDonald. She's from Coburg, Ontario. That's not too far from where I am. And here she is at 70 years old. She was a pretty typical 70-year-old. She was carrying probably an extra 50 pounds, and she was on about 6 different medications for diabetes, cholesterol, and blood pressure. This is very typical. And I think what happened was her doctor wanted to put her on another medication, and she thought, this is nuts. And so she started to exercise. And within 2 years, she transformed her health. She got off all of her meds with her doctor's approval because she got her cholesterol down and her blood pressure down and her diabetes went away. And here's Joan today at 76. And it took her about 2 years to get into this kind of shape, but she maintains it. And so the point of this is it's literally never too late. I'm going to show you another study about this. My mom's 87. And a couple years ago, when she was starting to approach her 85th birthday, now she'd been diabetic for almost 30 years, carried quite a bit of extra weight, couldn't really get up and down the stairs. She had a stair lift, and then the stair lift broke. It was super expensive to fix. And so she would just go downstairs to the basement once a week to do the laundry and then kind of crawl up. It was not a good thing. Anyway, she was approaching her 85th birthday, and she decided she wanted to live to 100. That was just her goal. Her mom's, for better or for worse, when she sets her mind to something, can be very stubborn about it. So said, I had nothing to do with it. And she started to improve her diet. And she's not exercising a ton, but she managed to lose weight. She is no longer considered to be diabetic. She takes no medication. She has had healthy blood sugars for the last 2 years. And now she goes up and down the stairs every day whenever she feels like it. She says sometimes she does it a few times just for fun, but she no longer needs the stair lift. She just carries her laundry up and down. So, in case anybody was thinking that it's too late, I guess if you're here, you're not thinking that, but just as a reminder, we can all make changes at any age. So exercise, very important. I have to admit, I can't get my mom to really exercise, but I can't argue with her results. Okay, so next, supporting cognition with nootropics. Who's heard of nootropics? All right, nootropics is a word that means nutrients that help your brain work better. There are lots of nootropics. Some of them are prescription medications. Technically, something like Adderall, which is an ADHD medication, would be considered to be a nootropic. There are lots of natural nootropics. And so I'm going to help you with nutrients, to tell you about some nutrients that can help your brain work better. And then we can talk a little bit about brain fog in a minute. Okay, so certain nootropics, like I would put omega-3 essential fatty acids, and everybody's heard of them, in the category of nootropic because we know that they make the brain function better. Technically, as a nootropic, most people think of something that you take and you feel the difference. For example, caffeine is a nootropic that probably most of us have on a daily basis because it perks you up and it can help with focus and concentration. That's technically a nootropic. So omega-3 essential fatty acids, they do help your brain function better. You won't necessarily feel that change like some of the other things I might mention here. But I'm going to talk to you about another, like several nutrients that are important for brain function. Phosphatidylserine, acetyl-L-carnitine are a few of them that I'll get to. Okay, so omega-3 essential fatty acids. These are super important for brain health. What are your favorite sources of omega-3s in your diet? What do you eat for those?
Salmon?
Salmon, great. Okay, anything else? Avocado, yeah, those are good healthy fats. The deep cold water fish, the smash fish, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardine, and herring, smash. The smaller fish, like anchovies and sardines, are suitable to be eaten on a daily basis. The salmon, because of the size of it, unfortunately, even if it's wild caught, the environmental contaminants, you shouldn't have it more than twice a week. So we need other sources of all of those omegas. You can get healthy fats from plant-based sources like hemp and flax and avocado, for example, but the brain needs to convert them into the omega-3s that it will use. Well, there's a lot of info here, but as I mentioned, brain is 60% fat by dry weight. The omega-3s, DHA and EPA, are super important for how the brain works. nuts and bolts of brain function. And we know that low levels of these omega-3s are associated with the risk of Alzheimer's. And supplementing with omega-3s, even for people who are starting to show the early signs of dementia, can help with all kinds of symptoms like mood, memory, ability to navigate around the home, these kinds of things. So getting more omega-3s in are very, very important for our brain function. Ideally, we want to be getting in, like we have omega-3 to omega-6. So what are omega-6s? The seed oils, the processed vegetable oils. These are high in what are called omega-6 fatty acids, which are pro-inflammatory. The big thing that the omega-3s do for us, one of the big things, is they are anti-inflammatory. So getting in more of those and less of the fats that cause inflammation, like the vegetable oils, for example, the better we are. Does that make sense? Okay. So to give you an example, you can, as I mentioned, the smash fish, as well as flax seeds, flax oil, fish oil, pharmaceutical grade fish oil will take fish, processes it in a way that removes the environmental contaminants, so you get the omega-3s without the environmental contaminants normally found in fish. So who takes an omega-3? Yeah, okay, most of you do. Okay, that's good to know. So here's an example of a pharmaceutical grade high potency omega-3. You're looking at 2,200 milligrams per 2 soft gels, which is a typical dose for, especially in the wintertime, for somebody who's concerned about, you need a little bit more omega-3 in the wintertime, cognitive health. To give you an example of some other nootropics that I'll mention and I'll talk about, you've got in your, the packets that were on your seats, these little sample packs of Cognizade, which is a kit, and it contains these 1-a-day packets that have a number of nutrients for brain health. So there's 2 different omega-3 essential fatty acid supplements in there. There's a B complex. B complex does a number of things for our cognitive function. It works in the mitochondria to help us make energy. B complex will also help lower levels of homocysteine, which is a compound that can affect your brain function. And so that's in there. And then there's 2 types of fatty type compounds. A phosphatidylcholine here. So phosphatidylcholine is a nutrient that your body will use to make acetylcholine, which is the brain's major neurotransmitter. And so that's an important part of thinking clearly is phosphatidylcholine. That's considered to be a nootropic because it helps to make acetylcholine. There's also phosphatidylserine, which is a nutrient that is found or should be found in your brain cell membranes. It tends to decline over time, but if you can get the phosphatidylserine back into your membranes, the brain cells will communicate better with one another. So that's the sample kit you have there. That's the Cognizade, which is these 5 different products in one packet that you can sort of take and go. You can take it all at once or split it throughout the day. So the idea is for healthy mood balance and healthy focus and concentration, just in case you're wondering what's in the packet there. Okay, next, a nootropic that I want to mention called acetyl-L-carnitine. Who's heard of carnitine, L-carnitine? Yeah? Okay. This is one of my all-time favorite studies. This is a snapshot of a study done in Italy. And this particular study was done on centenarians. In other words, people only 100 years of age and older. All of the trial participants in this study were between 100 and 106 years of age. And they had these groups, 2 groups, and then each group walking every day. In addition to walking, one group got L-carnitine as a nutritional supplement, and one group got a placebo. And at the end of 12 weeks, both groups had improvements in their weight, in their muscle mass. Both groups generally felt better. But the group that took the L-carnitine had much greater improvements in their increase in muscle mass, decrease in it's never too late, first of all, to make improvements. Secondly, exercise is great, but certain nutrients can help us act like tools to get more out of the exercise. Specifically, what the carnitine does, sometimes that carnitine is called the fat bus because it drives around, picks up fatty acids, drives them into the mitochondria where they're burned for energy. So this is why people take L-carnitine as a nootropic because it helps to increase cognitive focus and concentration and decrease cognitive fatigue. So L-carnitine is an example of a nutrient that you can use as a tool to get your mitochondria to work more efficiently to create more energy. So L-carnitine is available on its own. As you can see here, this acetyl form will cross the blood-brain barrier to get into the brain to help it work more efficiently. So this is something people use sometimes for brain fog. This is one of the things that people will say helps clear their brain fog. There's one or two more things that we can talk about when it comes to that. And the acetyl L-carnitine is also available on its own as well as in a combination to increase mitochondrial energy. That is to help your mitochondria make more energy so you feel more energetic without caffeine. Okay. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Who here has trouble sleeping? Okay. Who here feels like they sleep well? Okay, looks like we're about 50-50 on that. All right. For people who have trouble sleeping, difficulty getting to sleep or difficulty staying asleep? Staying asleep. Yeah, okay, or both. No, both. Okay, waking too early, like 5 in the morning, can't get back to sleep, or waking every 2 hours. Who has all of the above? Okay, cool. Okay, we can do a whole talk on sleep. So, there's lots of things we can say about sleep, and I'm happy to talk a lot about sleep. What I have here is specifically has to do with sleep and the brain. And that is, insomnia is problematic, or poor sleep is problematic, and if you suffer with poor sleep, it's worth taking steps to help improve it. You're thinking, brain and brain, I want to get a better night's sleep. We know that restricted sleep can increase cortisol levels, your stress hormone levels, and then cortisol, whether too high or too low, if it's out of whack, can affect your brain function, specifically the size and shape of your hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that gets affected with Alzheimer's. And we know that shorter sleep duration during midlife can affect brain function or is associated with dementia later in life. So that all is kind of scary sounding. Why would this be the case? What's going on? So you know that we sleep in different cycles, right? The sleep happens in roughly cycles of 90 minutes to 2 hours throughout the night. At the beginning of the night, we spend more time in what's called deep or stage 4 sleep, or you're supposed to, you should. And then later in the night, like say between 3 and 6 in the morning, whenever you happen to get up, you spend more time in lighter, what's called REM, rapid eye movement, or dream sleep. And both of those stages of sleep are important, the deep sleep and the light sleep. We know that during dream sleep, we process memories and emotions, we consolidate memories, so it's good for learning things, forgetting things you don't want to remember, don't need to remember. But what happens in that deep sleep was a bit of a mystery up until not too long ago. We now know that in the deepest stages of sleep, there is a circulatory system, not blood circulation, but lymphatic circulation, that opens up in the brain just at that time of night, during that stage of sleep, that cleans out the brain. You literally clean your brain while you're sleeping. It's a really odd thing that we now understand, but this is the importance of deep sleep. So deep sleep tends to happen at the beginning, more so at the beginning of the night. So let's see if you go to bed around 10 o'clock, just as an example. Between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., you're spending more of your time
and this is when this brain cleaning process happens. So if you're not getting a good night's sleep, one of the reasons why you feel groggy and unrefreshed in the morning is because your brain hasn't been cleaned the way it should. As odd as that sounds. So, poor sleep, especially at the beginning of the night, difficulty getting to sleep, tossing and turning, waking every couple of hours, is associated with this insufficient brain clearance, which may be the connection between why poor sleep at midlife is associated with dementia later in life. So high stress levels will interfere with this kind of deep sleep. High blood pressure will. It's important to always keep your blood pressure controlled, and high levels of alcohol. On the flip side, good quality sleep, good vascular health, regular exercise, and low levels of alcohol are all associated with better brain clearance and a better action of the deep sleep. Yeah.
Is this affected at all by, we've got some nighthawks in the family that maybe don't fall asleep till 1 a.m. Is that tied to this?
It's a good question. I haven't seen the studies between nighttime sleeping habits. Now, are they natural nighthawks, or are they having caffeine late in the day and that's what's keeping them up?
Natural.
Natural nighthawks, yeah. So I haven't seen studies as to whether there's an association, because people do have certain tendencies or proclivities or their nature, right? So that's not to say that they're not getting deep sleep. They may be by their nature getting it later in the night, but I need to see the researcher if they've looked at that. So this is a really interesting thing that we have recently learned about how the brain works. Okay, so I will just make a few comments about sleep hygiene, just in terms of a public service announcement. Now, this is not taking a shower before you go to bed. Sleep hygiene is just things you can do naturally in terms of habits to get a better night's sleep. Try to sleep and wake at the same time every day. If you can, even on weekends. Sleep in a completely dark room, blackout curtains if possible, or use like a blackout sleep mask. Conversely, when you wake up in the morning, open those blinds, take off that mask, get your eyes exposed to light first thing in the morning. Avoid caffeine, if you're sleeping poorly, avoid caffeine after noon. Avoid screens near bedtime. There's lots of faces on that one. TV screens, computer screens, phone screens, they all emit a blue light, which sends a message to your pineal gland that it's daytime, and that can interfere with your brain's production of melatonin. So melatonin is stimulated by darkness, which is why sleeping in a dark room is important. In the morning, you want to shut off melatonin. That's why you make sure you get exposed to some, even in the winter time, even if it's just lamp lights, it doesn't have to be sunlight. But yeah, avoiding those screens at night. Eat clean, stay hydrated, exercise regularly. We already talked about these things, important for sleep, and connecting with nature. You can also consider a white noise machine. So all of these things are important tips if you're not sleeping well. Now,
So what's the average amount of time that seniors should be looking at sleeping? Like not maybe continuous, but when you go to bed at a certain time and you get out of bed in the morning, you may wake up 2 or 3 times, but at the same time you still actually fall asleep.
great question. So that whole 8 hours of sleep per night is based on, and some people will vary between 7 hours and 9 hours, and there is a little bit of variation between individuals, and it does seem to how much sleep you need does seem to run in families, but between that 7 to 9 hour mark, left to my own devices, whole life, sleep for exactly 9 hours. I can get by on 8. I can function on 7. Anything under that is not great. So if you have a normal, mostly throughout your life, you've been a 7 or 8 hour person, try to aim for that. Sometimes people do get up or have breaks in their sleep in the night. That's not critical. But if you're waking up unrefreshed and multiple times throughout the night, then maybe you're not getting the sleep quality that you need. But yes.
So what would cause a person like I noticed for myself, even when I
not perky even after getting 7 or 8 hours of
Yeah,
sleep.
well, I would classify myself, and I always said, I'm not a morning person. And it usually takes me a couple of hours before I start my day, and go through it.
And so some people don't wake up and rush out of bed. And if that's the pattern throughout your whole life, then that may be more. And if it ran in the family, like if your mom or somebody else was very similar, just kind of slowly get going in the morning. Oh, not really? Okay. If you find it's something that has been the case your whole life, maybe that's normal, because some people, maybe I'm biased, because most people in my family take an hour to get going in the morning, just to get right up to speed. But as long as you're feeling functional, not, say, groggy or hungover or unwell, nauseous, for example, in the morning, then there's a variation in terms of what's wrong with that. Okay, so those are sleep hygiene tips. Now, there are a number of nutrients that can help you sleep better. I'll mention a few of them. Now, everybody's heard of supplemental melatonin. I'm curious, who's tried melatonin? Okay, who likes it? Who doesn't feel great with it? All right, so that was about 50-50. So melatonin works like wonders for individuals, and other people take it and feel not great the next day. Too groggy, drowsy, hungover, headache. So the point is, if you're not sleeping well, in addition to all the other these things here, melatonin is worth trying. Start with a small amount, like a milligram. Your first night, see how you feel. If you get a good night's sleep, wake up feeling refreshed. That may be a good dose for you. You could try increasing the dose. But if you don't feel well, then you can look for melatonin-free sleep options. One that happens to be here, so I put in a slide on it. Now this is at the higher end. So I find that, so this particular one has 10 milligrams of melatonin, so this is at the higher end. If you've never tried melatonin, don't start with this one. But what's interesting about this is the 10 milligrams of melatonin has half of the immediate release and half of the delayed release to help you sleep throughout the night. This combination also has L-theanine, 5-HTP, and botanical medicines like herbs, plant-based medicines for sleep. So this is something to consider if you need sleep support. Two other nutrients that also fall in the category of nootropics that don't cause drowsiness, but can potentially help with sleep. GABA is one of them, L-theanine is another one, as well as taking magnesium at nighttime. Who takes magnesium as a supplement? Okay, who takes it at bedtime? Most. Yeah, I know. I should know that you're shopping at Good Natural. You're getting a lot of good information, and you're doing your own research. So that's another one to consider for improving sleep quality. Okay, so this brings us up to 8 o'clock. And I know that there were some questions and things we didn't necessarily touch on. I know that the game is on 8:30, so but did you learn about what you were hoping to hear about? What kinds of information? We haven't talked about brain fog yet. I can talk about that. Sure. Yeah.
And also arthritis.
Arthritis. See, okay, that's interesting. I can say a few words about arthritis. The focus, I didn't have anything prepared on that because the focus is on sleep, but it turns out that almost everything pretty much everything I talked about in terms of inflammation, omega-3s, exercise, healthy diet helps. When it comes to arthritis, there's a few other nutrients like curcumin is very, very helpful. And depending on the type of arthritis, some people may need things like collagen and or glucosamine to help with building up joints. But everything I said about inflammation applies equally to arthritis. Who else has concerns about brain fog? No? I'll just say, yeah, okay. I'll just say a few words about that. So brain fog also falls under the category of neuroinflammation. So it's not a pain, but it is a subjective symptom that is produced by inflammatory compounds. And so everything I mentioned about neuroinflammation applies equally to brain fog. Taking all those steps help. And it's a symptom certainly that we are hearing more about in the last couple of years.
I'm just wondering if there's any studies that show the relation between people that have shift work the majority of their career as they age. Is there an increase in cognitive dysfunction or?
Interesting. That's a great question, and you would think that could be the case. I haven't specifically looked at that in terms of long term, but we know that based on even just based on the disrupted sleep, that could be the same risk factor. That could apply in the disrupted sleep at a certain period of life is higher risk of dementia later. But that's not to say that there is nothing that can be done about it. So, as an example, we know that people this is an interesting study that just came out last week. So people who do shift work seem to be at higher risk have higher risk factors in the cardiovascular department. But they've done a new study when they show that people who work shift work but don't eat at night can lower all of their cardiovascular risk factors to the same as people who don't work shift work. So there's something about not eating at night that seems to affect the risk factors when it comes to, at least to cardiovascular health. I haven't seen the studies when it comes to cognitive health, but given the disrupted sleep, it's worth taking steps to address neuroinflammation.
I do have it's sort of related, but how does sleep apnea affect people that have it? With, because I have a partner that he ended up getting a CPAP machine, but how does that affect his brain?
Great question. Yeah. So sleep apnea is not great for the brain. The oxygen deprivation creates free radical damage. Ultimately, it's creating inflammation. So sleep apnea is a type of sleep disturbance that leads to neuroinflammation. So it's one of the underlying factors to that cascade of issues that we're talking about. So certainly with somebody who has sleep apnea, now sleep apnea by definition is an inflammatory condition. So somebody who has sleep apnea to begin with, it's worth for them to be taking any steps they can to, like all the steps I explained to, decrease inflammation, diet, exercise, etc. And considering nutrients like omega-3s, for example.
So this all-in-one package that should boost
That
it?
covers, yeah, that
covers everything.
yeah, that's right. Any other questions?
Lion's
Yeah.
mane, what can you tell me about lion's mane?
Oh, lion's mane. Ooh, lion's mane, yes. So lion's mane is definitely under the category of nootropic. So this is a mushroom that has been shown to improve cognitive function. So some people take it, say students as a study aid, for example, or people who are looking to increase their focus and concentration. I'm not familiar with the research, only because I haven't checked it out in terms of lion's mane and say dementia prevention, but it definitely falls under the category of the nootropic in terms of improving cognitive function. Yeah. Anything else? I thought I saw another hand up in the back. If you have any other specific questions, as I'm packing up, I'm happy to answer those. I hope this has been practical information. And the point of that I wanted to leave you with is that there's lots of things we can do. Our health on a number of levels, including our brain health, is well within our control. There's always improvements we can make. It is literally never too late, even if you're a centenarian. And it's also never too early, and the things we do now affect us down the road. So I hope that this was helpful information and at least take that home with you. So if there aren't any other, is that a drop?
Yes, we're going to do it.
Oh, so then, thanks everybody for your attention, questions, appreciate it. And looks like we're going to do a drop.
right. Thank you all so much for joining us today and being a part of this incredible session with Dr. Rheaume. We hope you're leaving with new insights, inspiration, and a deeper appreciation for your health and wellness journey. At the back, we have tables set up with the entire Regeneralife line. That will be 10% off this evening only. So we have staff around that would love to help you with any questions that you may have. But before we officially wrap up, we've got a little something special for to show our appreciation. We've got our lovely gift basket that you saw when you came in today.